Good afternoon, everybody. My name is E.R. Anderson. I'm the Executive Director of Charis Circle. Charis Circle is the nonprofit programming arm of Charis Books, and Charis Books is the South's oldest independent feminist bookstore. We are delighted to be here with all of you today in celebration of Dr. Lewis R. Gordon's Fear of Black Consciousness. Dr. Gordon is an Afro-Jewish philosopher, political thinker, educator, and musician. He is professor and head of the philosophy department at UCONN-Storrs. He has received accolades for his many influential books and articles, many of which have been reprinted and translated around the globe. He is Honorary President of the Global Center for Advanced Studies and a former president of the Caribbean Philosophical Association, for which he now serves as its chairperson of awards and global collaborations. Gordon's previous works include Disciplinary Decadence, His Majesty's Other Children, and with Jane Anna Gordon, Of Divine Warning. And Fear of Consciousness is again the book we are gathered to celebrate today. So welcome, Dr. Gordon. And we are joined today by Dr. Hortense J. Spillers, who is the Gertrude Conaway Vanderbilt Professor of English at Vanderbilt University. Since receiving her PhD from Brandeis, she has taught at Wellesley College, Haverford College, Emory University, and Cornell. She has also served as a guest professor in the program in literature at Duke University during the academic year of 2002 to 2003, and for 2 consecutive years during tri-semester terms at the John F. Kennedy Center for North American Studies at the Free University in Berlin, Germany in 2000 and 2001. She is the recipient of numerous honors and awards, among them grants from the Rockefeller Foundation and the Ford Foundation. She has been a fellow at the National Humanities Center, Research Triangle, and the Center for the Study of the Behavioral Sciences in Palo Alto. While at Haverford, she was the chair of the English department for 2 years before moving to Cornell, where she joined the Norton Projects by serving as one of the period editors for the Norton Anthology of African American Literature. Her collection of scholarly essays, Black, White, and in Color, Essays on American Literature and Culture, was published by the University of Chicago Press in 2003 and remains a major work of literature and a bestseller at Charis to this day. So we're very honored to have Dr. Spillers here with us today. We're very honored to also have the Auburn Avenue Research Library on African American Culture and History, our favorite co-sponsor, joining us. So thank you, as always, to Auburn Avenue. And thank you to everyone who is watching this from home. We love it when you shout out where you're watching from, as many people have already started doing. So keep going with that. We want to encourage you to ask questions. So you can do that either in the chat or in the Ask a Question box, which is sort of at the bottom center of your screen. We will try to assimilate the questions sort of towards the end of the conversation, but just start putting them in there as soon as they occur to you, and we will attend to them towards the end. Thank you again to everyone. It is a real honor and delight to have these 2 scholars with us today at Charis.
Thank you.
Thank you, ER. So, Hortense, it's so great to see you.
Great to be here. Happy New Year.
Thank you. I've been saying to folks, Happy Gregorian New Year, to remind them we're on the Gregorian calendar. But yes, okay. To all, Happy New Year.
Happy New Year. Yeah. Friends from Syracuse, Binghamton, California, DC, Asheville.
Yeah.
From all.
Yeah, Atlanta.
Wonderful book.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe we should start with your showing the differences between the 2 covers.
Sure.
Of your book.
Yeah, I received, the book is published by Farrar Straus Giroux in the United States and by Penguin Random House in the UK. And these are the 2 covers. And these are wonderful artists. This is the artist who did this one in the US, Na Kim, and Simi Abe in the UK. And I love both covers. They both exemplify different dimensions of the book.
Yeah.
And also I love what the fact that we can have 2 interpretations,
right?
And the joy that both get it. They get it, you know. This says a lot about what's happening in the United States. It really
Yes.
says it. And this says a lot about not only what's in the book, but, what's going on in the UK and beyond, because this publisher also publishes in Australia, Canada, it's India, etc.
Yeah, yeah.
And yeah, there's this extent to which we have to be reminded of the beauty of multiple interpretations.
Right, right. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I
And
was not aware of the reading of the cover, the US cover, until you pointed it out this morning. The Blackness Rising?
yeah,
I don't think I realized that.
yeah. And
Yeah.
it's so poignant that we are in the context of Atlanta, Charis bookstore, because as we know, I got to give a shout out to Stacey Abrams.
Right,
You
right.
know,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
we're holy and but of course we also dealt with January 6th last year and this year, and
Yeah,
this fear people have of blackness rising, and but also, and that's the whole point, right?
yeah,
This
yeah.
So I mean, it's subtle, but in terms of
It
her
is
just using black and white, but not Kim really said a lot. Each cover just says so much, so
right.
beautifully. So yeah, I'm overjoyed. And again, for those who are watching, um, yeah, the artists are in the UK, Simi Abe; in the US, Nakim. And
Okay.
so shout out to these wonderful, gifted young women.
It is, yes. What inspired this book? Did the pandemic inspire fear of Black consciousness, or is this something you've been working on before?
It's something I was working on before, but I
Yeah,
should but I should add that it's a very interesting journey, because although, as you know, my first book was Bad Faith and Anti-Black Racism,
okay.
and for those who are curious, bad faith basically is when we lie to ourselves, when we are trying, and we try to avoid reality, and we try to avoid our freedom. And so
Mm-hmm.
I'd written that book because I had I'd argued that, one of the weird things about racism is racism involves trying to deny the humanity of another human being,
Yeah,
but at the same time you have to find a human being to deny.
that's right.
So
Yeah.
it's a lot. So it's basically lying to yourself when you are
Mhm. Yeah,
racist.
yeah.
So, and I'd written a book called Her Majesty's Other Children that piqued the interest of an editor in Boston by the name of Eric Chinsky. And
Mm-hmm.
when I was at Brown, he had written me a letter asking me if I would be interested in writing a book on Black consciousness. And this was 24 years ago.
Okay.
And
Yeah.
it's rather funny because I had a doctoral student then, Rowan Ricardo Phillips, who's a poet.
Okay.
And so he and I were discussing, and I outlined what would have been the book then.
Okay.
And so we were talking, but then life changes, all kinds of other things happened, and we know life has a way of telling you when is the right time to do things.
To do something. Yeah. Yeah.
So so Rowan subsequently, he's an award-winning poet. He's a brilliant young man. He's out there. And years later, Eric, because I wrote all these other books in the interim, was now with
Mhm.
Farrell Straus Giro, and he wrote me an email, said, "Did you ever decide to write that Black Consciousness book?"
Oh, okay. I
And
see.
I
Yeah.
and I said, actually, I'm glad I didn't write it then,
Yeah.
because in the past 24 years, I've gone all over the planet and
Mhm.
developed a more global perspective and nuanced understanding of what what a quarter a century ago would have been more theoretical than that
Okay.
concrete human engagement with all the beauty and complexity and language of what is involved in saying Black consciousness.
Okay. So you're happier with, well, I guess that wouldn't be the right way to put it. You would have been happy with the one that Lewis Gordon wrote 24 years ago for whatever reason. And you're happy with the one that Lewis Gordon just wrote, right? But they were
Actually,
different things.
when actually I'm happier, I'm very grateful that I didn't write it 24 years ago.
Okay.
I'm actually happier with the one I've written now.
Right. Yeah.
Because yeah, I'm elated. You know, that's an existential reflection, isn't it? You know, sometimes there's so many moments in life. There are lots of things I'd wanted to do in my youth that in my older age, I'm so grateful that I didn't do them then.
Yeah.
Because of the relationships that I've developed over the years.
Yeah.
And the growth.
Yeah.
And also just the different languages I've studied and learned. And I see, for instance, you spent some time in Germany. Yeah, Deutsch gefällt mir sehr gut. You know, I do work in Germany as well. But,
yes.
you know, just studying ancient African languages, you know, Meduneter, the little bit I've learned from my times in South Africa around Zulu and, you know, isiZulu, Tswana, working on my Kiswahili, working on different inflections of French. You know, in my youth, I would have just worked at trying to speak French the way they do, say, in Paris.
Right. Right.
But I had the wonderful experience when I was teaching at Toulouse, because I learned whenever I would go to whenever I'd go to Toulouse, I'd go to the immigrant market.
Okay. Yeah.
And you know, the immigrants just want to make the sale, so they just want to communicate. And it made me more relaxed learning in that context. So my actual French is with a Jamaican accent.
Okay.
And it's funny, but when if you think about it, when we speak to people from France and they speak with a French accent,
yes,
we find it cool. And so what I learned is be yourself. Just be comfortable in who you are.
Right.
Like there are places I speak with a more American accent, and I'm comfortable. And so things like that are wonderful developments that I'm grateful. I think they're just life circumstances that just say this is the right time.
To do it. Yeah.
And with all my books, I'm always writing more than one book, but I never really plan when the book will come out. I let the book tell me when it's ready.
Okay. That's it. You make a very interesting distinction here. Well, it's a lot of interesting things about the book, but one of the things that I wanted to hear you talk more about, because I think it's so significant. You make a distinction between Black consciousness and Black consciousness, right? And the only way you can get what that difference is to see it on the printed page, because the way it's written here, the Black consciousness that is liberatory and active is spelled with a capital B, but then the Black is also italicized. And so maybe that's where I would like for you to start talking about what's between the covers of the book, what's inside, about that difference that you spell out so early. I mean, one is a small b, and the font is the same across both terms, and the other one is a different thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, this is something that the moment people were transformed into the category Black
Mm-hmm.
that many of us have been thinking about and struggling with. And I stress in the book, it's not only me.
Yeah.
We see we can observe this discussion going back all the way to people in the 19th century like Samuel Delany, or you know, um, and we also can see it in reflections also with Anna Julia Cooper, and of course Du Bois, and in Haiti with Antonia Femet. I try a lot in this book, even where there are ideas I'm contributing to
Mm-hmm.
acknowledge the ancestors who were really articulating them. And you may notice they're very alive in this book.
Oh yes. I mean that lovely list at the very beginning.
Mm.
Two. The Hank Aaron, Colin Abel, Samir Amin, Kamu Braithwaite, Chadwick Boseman, and it goes on. Little Richard
Yeah, gotta talk about it.
is
Yo, he revolutionized the
you
music.
know, so on and so forth. Yeah, so it's a big tribute to the ancestors. But I cut you off. Go ahead.
Oh no, that's okay. The thing is, the thing is, there are people who are tempted to look at blackness solely in the negative. There are people who try to look at the whole history. We know that colonization led to a situation of enslavement and dehumanization,
Mm-hmm.
and there were people ripped from their homes, dispersed across the world, and in many cases, even those who remained within their home got up one morning from their understanding of themselves as Ibu, Yoruba, Oza, Luo, Tokoyo,
Mm-hmm.
Swana, down the list, or people who are Kuri in Australia or Maori in, New Zealand, all the way through, or the varieties of people in this country. A lot of people don't even realize that, a lot of the indigenous populations of the Americas that the European settlers encountered were very dark people. There are lots of changes that were imposed upon them.
Mm-hmm.
And within that framework, they went to bed understanding themselves as who they were as human beings. And then suddenly were being told they were something else. And that something else that was imposed on them, they were being told was not fully human.
Yeah.
And it was done at first through violence of the material kind, the
Mm-hmm.
physical assault, weapons, torture. But you can't control a people. You through that alone, you would exhaust yourself. It's what Boogie Wat Younger points out. If you use material means to subordinate people, control them, and exploit them, you
Yeah.
have to devote a lot of resources to that.
Yes.
But it's better, it's easier, more efficient to let them believe the lies you tell them about themselves and let them actually do the hard work for you of degrading themselves.
Yeah.
And so that small Black consciousness at first was the construction of people as Black in the way the people who hated Black people saw us.
Mm-hmm.
However, the thing to bear in mind is that those people were human beings, we are human beings, and human beings always exceed what is imposed upon us.
Right. Right.
And
Right.
so those people deep down knew their humanity. They fought and struggled in many ways, not only in the majestic Haitian Revolution or the Sharp Rebellion in Jamaica or the Tula Rebellion in Curacao and the
Mm-hmm.
long list of rebellions, because
Mm-hmm.
part of the lies told is to make us seem passive, as if we don't do anything, as if it was just done to us.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
But but we fight in many ways. It's not just about whether we have machetes and guns, but we also fight in subtle, dignified ways of affirming our beauty, our food, our
Yeah.
love. And so even the lowercase b black
Yes.
was never completely an outcome or something created by white people. There were always the lowercase black people trying to create something else.
Yeah.
And the point at which there's this liberatory moment of understanding that you don't have to live as trying to get away from being a black person.
Mm-hmm.
You can creatively build something different that affirms a loving understanding of what it is to be in a relationship with people who are ultimately on the right side of history.
Right. Yeah.
And that's from Biko to Fanon through to people such as our beloved Sylvia Winter, people like you, Hortense. The list is long. Jamaica Kincaid, with whom I spoke last night. The list is long. Moboko Bore in South Africa, Boogie Wati. This is the point at which you say, wait a minute, let us now have a relationship to the not only the right side of history, but stare truth and reality in the face and become actors of a different possibility. And that's that big capital B Black consciousness.
Right. Yes.
It's a critical consciousness, but it's also a loving, life-affirming one.
So that it's in effect a second birth, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And in fact, the first kind I describe as being locked in a form of Black melancholia. Melancholia is a kind of bereavement, a kind of loss. And the loss, of course, is that anti-Black racism, colonialism, misogyny, because I see them as all interconnected.
Right. Yeah.
What the loss is there is to tell you that, one, you're created in that identity by the Euro-modern world, but then two, you don't legitimately belong to it. And so what you lose there is a belonging, your humanity. And that loss, the idea of being indigenous to a world that rejects you, that's that lowercase Black melancholia.
Yeah.
But the refusal to say, to stay there. If you say, wait a minute, why am I going to make my value depend on a world that rejects me?
Exactly. Yes.
Why don't I take an insight from Audre Lorde, which is, and many people read her incorrectly. When she says the master's tools won't tear down the master's house.
Right. Yeah.
What she didn't add, but I know she had this in her argument.
Okay.
Masters don't build houses in slavery. We build houses. If our ancestors didn't bring their knowledge, creativity, love, and truth, this country wouldn't have prospered.
Right.
The inventions, the women who have built all these ideas like wireless technology, like out of love, even the algorithm from the computer was from a woman. You know what I mean? When we had Lovelace, and we think of Addie Lamar, we think of the creativity not only from Walker, but all the way through to Lattimore with the filament of life, but not just inventions, ideas.
Yeah.
So we have tools. Why don't we build better houses? And why don't we build, in building a future and working at it, in a commitment to a better world, have a belonging that's not based on hate and insecurity and stupid notions like superiority.
Right. Yeah.
But built on dignity, respect, freedom, and the affirmation of the value of our fellow human being. I'd rather belong to that house. I think that house would have better food, better music.
Yeah.
I'd have a good time in that house.
Had you thought about this or just reflect a moment about the relationship between that transformative Black consciousness and double consciousness.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
In fact, the lowercase Black consciousness
Yeah.
is what Du Bois and others, of which they were aware, right? They call that's when you see yourself through the eyes of those who despise you. And so you think about what it is to be Black and what it is to be Black as perceived by whites or people who don't like Black people. Not all white people are people who hate Black people.
Exactly.
And there are a lot of non-white people who hate Black people. There are Black people who hate Black people.
Yes.
So but then you stop and say, wait a minute. But then that world creates a false dilemma.
Yeah.
It's a world of contraries, of segregation, of apartheid. It's a world where all that's good is white and all that's bad is Black.
Right.
But that's not our everyday existence. And then there's a point at which you say, wait a minute, any society that's going to do this to a people, maybe something's wrong with that society. And at that moment you say, maybe Black people aren't the problem. Maybe there's a problem with a society that makes us into problems. And at that moment, you move away from the separation into the communication, the dialectical, communicative practice. Right. And that Black consciousness, there are those who've written on it. Du Bois thought about it, Fanon, Richard Wright, Nell Larson, there are many others. Your writings have thought about it. And but Paget Henry called it potentiated second sight. But Jane Anna Gordon, she calls it potentiated double consciousness. Mm-hmm. And I like that formulation. And so, yeah, potentiated, you notice the word potential.
That's right.
The capital B Black consciousness is a potentiated Black consciousness.
Okay. Yeah.
And what's cool about it is you don't have to be Black to have that consciousness. If you become critical of a racist society, if you join those brave, creative women of Black Lives Matter in the communities and say, yo, we're fighting for real democracy, for real dignity and freedom, that is potentiated Black consciousness.
Yes. Yeah. Where does Jane talk about that?
Believe it or not, she talks about that in her dissertation. She talks about that in her book, Creolizing Political Theory. Mm-hmm. She talks about that. She talked about it in so many writings that it's funny that even with me, who've read her work I've read her work closely, talk about it. She did it in so many. There's a way in which an idea is so good that you forget the author.
Exactly. Yes.
It's like one time when somebody on Facebook had written to me trying to tell me that I should look into the concept of disciplinary decadence. It would be useful for my work. And somebody saw the exchange, and I didn't say anything. And the person wrote to the person who advised me and said, he created the concept. But I found that so delightful. I like the idea when people forget that I created certain concepts.
Exactly. Yes.
Because it means they're really using it.
Yeah.
But then I realized, wait a minute. When I went as a scholar to trace where the concept emerged of saying potentiated double consciousness.
Right. Yeah.
It turned out it was in Jane's work.
Right.
And she herself just presumed somebody else must have thought about it because it's so obvious.
Okay.
But it turned out that formulation was hers. And
wow, yeah.
And I've experienced that a lot in my writing. Some things I think are so obvious. I say, surely I couldn't have been the one who thought of it.
Yeah.
And so I don't write it. That's why I refuse to say I or I, because I can't believe some concepts other people haven't thought about.
Okay. Exactly.
And so And I
Yeah.
think it's cool. It's cool. And but yeah, that's that. But that those are some of the places one could see her talking about that issue. In her
Mm-hmm.
Creolizing Political Theory book.
Mm-hmm.
She also does so in a wonderful essay she does on Du Bois and social science. It's in the Companion to African American Studies. But the very first place she talks about this was in her dissertation at the
Okay.
University of Pennsylvania in political science and political theory there.
Okay. Okay. You know, you say something in the book that is in my mind, that has been in my mind quite a lot the last 10, 15 years or so. When you talk about the Black body and how discussions of the Black body somehow apparently isolate the Black body from something else, right? From some more holistic sense. Could you talk about that? Because that's very important. I've always assumed that I understand what writers are doing when they do that, but I see it all the time, and it I think it bothers me, like I perceive that it's bothering the author when you talk about it as a problem. So, you want to say more about that?
Yeah. Um, the short version is there are people who are talking about Black bodies in a way that erases Black people.
Mm-hmm.
They're surrendering. They're surrendering to a world that hates us to the point of wanting us to be mere things, to be mere surfaces, to be what Fanon called the epidermal schema, to be
Mm-hmm.
bodies without a point of view.
Mm-hmm.
And that is a terrible defeat if we accept that. Human beings are relationships. And for us to be relationships, we shouldn't buy into that problematic logic that treats people like things. We should understand that people communicate, our relationships, our freedoms, and have points of view and are valuable. And so the it's different if they were to be critical of saying we should do something about these people who are trying to transform our lived bodies, our embodied freedom, our relationship into things like properties.
Exactly. Yeah.
You know, yeah, it's funny. Most languages, when they refer to people, to a human being,
Mm-hmm.
a human being is not a thing. Um, a human being is an ongoing project, a living activity. And
Exactly.
in many languages, that 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 personhood in the Bantu speaking languages, you'll see this in many other languages. Sure, they are about what people do. But
Mm-hmm.
colonial languages want to possess everything. There's a wonderful author. Her last name is Switzer. She wrote a beautiful piece pointing out that in many societies, their languages have a lot of verbs. A lot of languages have verbs, more verb-based languages. But when they become colonial, they shift and have mostly nouns. And yeah, and so like English, Old English had mostly verbs. Colonial English, which is the one we've inherited, is 70% nouns and 30% verbs.
Oh,
Because it's
okay.
constantly, and think about it, like a river shouldn't really be a noun because it's flowing. A bay, if you're active in life, you shouldn't be a noun. You should be an
Mm-hmm.
ongoing relationship. And
Yeah.
so yeah, this thing is the lived body. It's not really a thing. And I am critical of this bodies talk. It also has another problem,
Yeah.
which is the less active you make us, the more you push us outside of political agency. If we're
Mm-hmm.
simply bodies, we're things that others do things to.
Mm-hmm.
But
Yeah.
if we think more in terms of being active agents of lived freedoms, and it's not that I want to get rid of the body, because the body enables us to have relationships.
Mm-hmm.
For instance, I'm embodied as here, which enables me to look at you and communicate with you there,
Yeah.
and you're here enables you to see me as you're there. So that's what makes reality possible.
Mm-hmm.
However, if I lock myself only into my body, then
Yeah.
I'm no longer open to you. And this is connected to, this is why I talk about, not just in this book, but all over my writings, about the connection between racism and misogyny
Yeah.
and patriarchy, because problematic masculinity treats men as closed, treats the body as impenetrable, as no one can enter. Whereas being open enables one to be enthusiastic. Enthusiasm means let God in, by the way, right?
Yeah.
To
Uh-huh.
not fear being open to communication. You see,
Yes. Yeah.
whereas white supremacy says I'm so superior, I'm closed, I'm protected. Ah,
Yeah. Yeah.
don't contaminate me, I'm pure.
Okay.
So
Yeah.
yeah. So there are many reasons why I'm critical of the way people talk about the body today.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah. That's it. That's a very important distinction that you make. I'm also intrigued by neoconservatism and neoliberalism as pandemics.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, this is. I think I say this in the blurb, but this is the first epistemology of the pandemic era that I've seen. Your book is the first epistemological inquiry or examination of certain implications of the pandemic. So I'm very curious what you're doing about. I'm very intrigued by what you're doing with those ideologies as sickness, right?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, they perpetuate precarity. They said, if it weren't for neoliberalism and neoconservatism,
yeah,
uh, the novel coronavirus would just be an isolated anomaly. But
mhm,
because neoliberalism and neoconservatism privatize power, they're connected to the same logic of what colonialism did. Everywhere colonialism went, it exacerbated death. It
mhm,
created conditions because neoliberalism and neoconservatism are ultimately against the human capacity to be social and communicate.
yeah,
And if you think about it, for instance, you notice I am antipathetic to the word social distance.
mhm,
I prefer to say physical distance because right now you and I are physically in different places. We're physically far apart, but
yeah,
right now we are socially close.
yeah, okay,
Communication makes us close. The technologies, if these technologies are used exclusively for exploitation, they
yeah,
manipulate us and keep us distant. But if
yeah,
they're used to bring the intimacy of communication, the joy, the love of sharing the world together,
yeah,
then we can be close. In fact, there are people who are physically close, as you know, and socially distant. Think of a bad marriage. Right. But
Yeah,
but the thing is, if you can make people socially distant,
yeah,
you can manipulate them. They
exactly.
now they now hunger to just consume. They're now prey to everything from the mechanisms of capitalist exploitation to voter brainwashing to the kind of neo-fascist stuff we see unleashed over the past several years.
Mhm.
People are more easy to exploit if we can be isolated and asocial. So part of the antidote against fascism,
Mhm.
against anti-Black racism, misogyny, class exploitation, we must have in it the understanding of connecting to each other in
Yeah.
our in social affirmation and love.
Mhm.
And but in the book, I give as you well, not just in the book, in my writings generally, you know, I we talk about the right and the left and politics in a very reductive way. And as you
Mhm.
said, I flesh out that epistemology and that social meaning about
Mhm.
how we can understand how people can get attached to things that undermine their well-being.
Yeah.
And,
Yeah.
and so, I elaborate those quite a bit.
Yeah, you do. Yeah. So that fear of Black consciousness can go either way or always, right? I mean, in other words, the fear can be expressed intramurally and outside Black experience, right? I mean, in other
Yeah,
words, Black people in certain circumstances can fear Black consciousness as well as, I won't say white people per se, but those anti-Black structures or systems wherever they are, or whoever is appropriating them, right? Can have a
absolutely.
fear of Black consciousness.
Yeah,
Yeah,
the fear of Black consciousness is the fear of dealing with the responsibility we have when we face truth and reality.
yeah.
It is. And it's hard. I mean, and I also don't do it self righteously. I understand
Yeah.
why people can in some cases because it's easier. We know people who live by their fears. They lock themselves up. They're really they're afraid of dealing with the implications of also addressing themselves. This is there
Mhm.
in psychoanalysis. The
Right.
psychoanalysts know that ultimately, at the end of the day, you have to take charge of your freedom and your responsibility for your life.
Yeah.
And what neoliberalism, neoconservatism do is they try to retreat into cherry pick notions of tradition, order, the right. You know, everything is supposed to be well set, etc. You're to be protected, you know, law, all of that.
Yes.
But when you think of that capital B Black consciousness, you don't know when you look to the future and take responsibility for it. You don't know the outcome in advance.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Right.
It requires a profound leap and a profound act of courage. And you
Mm.
have to love so intensely that the commitment is there to the point where you let go of your ego and it's
Mm.
not about you. It's about the love for what is greater than yourself.
Yeah,
And,
yeah. Mm.
but but fear
Mm-hmm.
makes one retreat into the self. It
Mm-hmm.
makes one retreat into the predictable,
Right. Right.
and makes one ultimately close oneself into a world, an edifice built on an edifice of lies.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and the truth of the matter is, as we all know, truth and love are far more difficult, but ultimately they make life far more meaningful.
Yeah. Yes. Exactly. Yeah. Maybe we should cut the audience into this conversation.
That would be
It's
wonderful.
wonderful.
Yeah,
Thank you so much for that.
sure. And thank
Yeah.
you for those questions, Hortense, and the conversation, which we've been having for many
For
years.
many years. That's a wonderful book.
Thank
I
you.
hope you sell lots of them today. I'm sure you will.
So we just have one question from the audience. It's from Dwayne Davis, and Dwayne asks, Lewis, do you think that the problem you identify with the body as locking us into an identity could also pertain to consciousness?
Thank you, Dwayne, for that question. The short answer is that it's what we can do is bring to consciousness a misrepresentation of reality that closes off our consciousness. I call that bad faith, right? Bad faith is when we lie to ourselves, when we flee a displeasing truth through investing in a pleasing falsehood. A pleasing falsehood is when we try to look at consciousness as a thing, because then we could say my consciousness, right?
Yeah.
Versus your consciousness.
But
Actually, consciousness is not a thing. Consciousness is a relationship. For you to be conscious at all, none of us is a God. So we don't bring the world into us like in my pocket or something. What it is we let go of what blocks our relationship to the world, and the world is able to appear. And so I don't think it pertains the same way. It's more, there are certain identities that we use to close the door. And if we put it in ordinary language, when I said there could be marriages in which people are physically close but socially distant?
Yes.
It's because although they're physically close, they have closed off the ability to communicate openly with each other.
Yeah.
And that openness, that is consciousness, because at every moment they're simultaneously aware that there may be two people, but there are more than two phenomena, because the two people are sharing reality. And reality is always bigger than us. So
on the two occasions when you used that metaphor of the married couple not communicating, I'm thinking of a famous play, but I'm not sure that I remember exactly who the playwright is. But here is you'll recognize it right away. Here is the story. And I have seen this on stage. It's only two actors. And the conversation leads them gradually to discover, after, however long the play is, that they're actually married. But the conversation starts like these two people are strangers. And they start talking to each other. And they end up saying things that make them realize that you're talking to somebody who's in the same room that you're in, somebody who's in the same bed that you're in, and it's a discovery between these two strangers, and I think that is powerful evidence of exactly the kind of thing that you're talking about. You've got physical proximity, but social distance, or you've got physical distance but social proximity, right? Who's the playwright? You all have to help me think of who
I'm having trouble recalling it right now.
But you know the play, right?
I know the play. And there's so many instances of this. What comes to mind as well is the wonderful, I think it was a Taiwanese film, Eat, Drink, Man, Woman. Also, it's in many films as well, but this one's between a father and a daughter. He has many daughters, but there's one daughter who is a great metaphor for the business world and capitalism, because the father is a chef and the daughter's in the business world. And it shows but the father suffers through an experience where he cannot taste food. So he cooks a big meal and invites his daughters over to eat the food. And so he's imagining the flavors through their responses. But there's a crucial moment in the film where the business daughter, the one where he has the worst relationship, they're not communicating.
Yes.
Events happen at a certain point where it turns out that she is the one with the gift for cooking. And one day she cooked the meal, and without thinking, because of course the issue is he was holding on to so much that it was blocking what Dwayne asked the consciousness to relate to the world. And when he let go of that conflict and she cooked, he without thinking, he turned to her and said, "I love the way you added the ginger." And then she turned and she said, "You could taste it?" And he stopped and he realized it, and the film ends beautifully. He just looks at her and he says, "Daughter." Isn't that powerful?
Yeah.
Yeah. And it makes you wonder, right?
Yeah.
How many things we're going through in our society. There's so many people are investing a lot of time into creating those blockages for us to communicate with each other as a society, you know?
Absolutely. Yeah.
And they're bullying us to turn so much into ourselves, to inoculate ourselves from actually something healthy, which is our ability to be able to experience each other's humanity and learn from each other. You know, like one of the things I love about our relationship, Hortense, is you and I love being students. We always love learning from each other, and we love learning from our students.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
I see we have another question that's come in from Alexandra Brown, and Alexandra says, Black grief and rage is so deeply saturated into our lens, modality, and epistemology that joy and love does not seem tangible or attainable. I have now begun to ask myself, if I lived in a world free of anti-Blackness or of whiteness, premised on Black liberation, what would I wear? The sad truth is, I think the grief is so deep, I do not yet have the capacity to answer the question. Would either of you care to say, on such a day, what would you wear?
Well, I don't know. Would you like first, Hortense? Or
well, I was thinking of a funny answer to that question. Maybe I wouldn't wear anything.
You know, that was my answer.
Is that your answer too?
I'll be naked. In fact, one of my greatest memories of joy was when I was a little boy.
Yeah.
You know, I was born in Jamaica and came to the United States when I was 9. But because I started speaking very early, I have memories from very early childhood. So I've all these detailed memories. But one of my favorite memories, because, you know, it's a Caribbean hot island, is when we were when I was a little boy and it would rain after a really hot day.
Yeah.
We would take off all our clothes, the children, and run out naked in the streets, and the water would just come all over us.
Yeah.
And I got to tell you, it's funny with my own kids to this day. Yeah. When we go to amusement parks, you know, I'm like just the dad. Like, you know, they're now all older people. When they were little, they're, you know, my wife Jane loves to go and all the stuff that would make you want to barf, you know. Yeah. And I'll be like, nah, man. But I love the water splash, you know, the flute, you know, when those rides that throw you in the water.
Yeah.
And I would like, bring it on, bring it on. Just saturate me with water.
With water.
And, and so, two things I'd like to say, in response to that question. The first thing is, we colonialism has never been complete. Racism has never been a complete. They want us to believe it's complete.
Mm-hmm.
It is never. And the reason it's never been complete is because we have never, ever took it sitting down. The thing we need to remember is Black women, men, queer Black people, trans Black people, all kinds of Black people, all kinds of people who are not Black, who are varieties of things, always fought against dehumanization. And it's because they have the project of trying to keep our eyes totally closed. Has always failed. There's always been this going on.
Yes,
And
exactly.
what people like Hortense, myself, right, but not just us. When we listen to, our jazz musicians, our reggae musicians, Fela Kuti in Nigeria. When we listen to Dinah Washington, what would I do without Dinah? When I listen to Mahalia Jackson's version of Duke Ellington's Dear Lord, when I think through the writings, when I look at Lorraine Hansberry's writings, when I think of Richard Wright, when I think of Baldwin, when I think through what Angela Davis did when I was an adolescent, when I read her autobiography, to know what this courageous young woman was doing. All of those examples are affirmations of life. And so, in a way, we've been putting on the clothes of liberation through standing up defiantly for our self-respect, dignity, and freedom.
Exactly.
And what we are fighting for is not simply what we would wear, but for those to come whom we'll never know, but paradoxically, through commitment and acts of love, could enable them to wear whatever they damn well please. And look back to us and say, thank God, those among our ancestors acted. They acted.
That's wonderful. Oh, by the way, I really thank the audience member who answered the question. That play is Ionesco's Bald Soprano.
Yes.
Yes.
Thank you. Who did that? We should give a shout out.
Dwayne Davis. Thank you, Dwayne.
Oh, it's Dwayne. Thank you, Dwayne.
Oh, okay. Wonderful.
We love
there's something I'd like to add though to the questioner who asked who had posed that about the grief. One of the things I have to say to that questioner is, although I'm talking about love and joy, do understand you have a right to your grief. I think the mistake people make with loss. Yeah, is it Alexandria?
Alexandra,
yeah, Alexandra. Do understand you have a right to your despair and grief. I think we make a mistake when people are suffering to try to tell them to just get over it or just move beyond it.
Exactly.
But remember, one of the beautiful things Fanon said in Panuama's blog, Black Skin, White Mass, when he found the despair, when he was struggling with negritude, he said he began to weep. I think weeping washes away the impediments to deal with reality. But weeping is also an acknowledgement of the trauma, the despair. You see, what you have a right to your anger. You have a right because you see, your anger is connected to a truth. And the fact of the matter is, when suffering is there, the thing to understand is that we should have an understanding, not to erase it, to deny it, but to find a way to acknowledge its truth and at the same time build life. All the losses I've had in life, it's not that they went away. They're there.
Yeah.
But they are also part of the strength in which each day I understand that I have to struggle, as all of us do, for
Right.
things greater than ourselves.
Yeah. 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 And I think that's the big lesson that we're missing in the society now, that seems to be in an unusually sick place at this moment, body and soul. I didn't know we were as bad off as we actually are. But the Trump years, the pandemic, and it's interesting to me that the Trump years ended with a sickness, a universal sickness. I didn't realize that things are as bad as they actually are. And I always thought I kind of understood how bad they were. But the society is so in need of redemptive action, and those verbs that you were talking about, that it's just, I don't even have words to describe what it is that we're looking at. I mean, you're looking at something that's massive in its implications, right? Because
Yeah,
we're so in need of that critical intelligence that you were talking about. Um,
and courage,
yeah,
you know,
absolutely.
I mean, there's certain things that really inspire me every day.
Yeah,
One of them, two of them are my mother and father. They're dead, but
yeah,
my mother and father lived in very harsh worlds. My father and his brothers were homeless at the age of 5. My mother, the kinds of things she suffered through, and what struck me about my mother and my father was their tenacity and their ability to love. And when I think about beyond them, because of this beautiful world called Black Studies, I'm able to go in and deal with the subjunctive, this other reality, to look through a kind of vicariousness, a kind of empathetic relationship to those who preceded me. And it enabled me to ask a question that the people today who are fighting against critical race theory are afraid to deal with.
oh my God, yeah,
Yeah, and that question
yeah,
is a very important question. All of us, every one of us who go through, whether it's, we call it Black feminist thought, Black studies, Black queer studies, Black philosophy. Well, there are a lot of Blacks we could put on it, Africana. But the thing that all of them compel us when we engage it to ask
yeah,
is, one, what would we have done in their situation?
right,
And two, it is absolutely extraordinary what those people who preceded us did in their situation.
yeah,
I mean,
absolutely,
when I try to imagine that there was an enslaved Black woman on a plantation in Maryland or in South Carolina or in parts of Brazil or Curacao or in
mm,
Leopold's Congo, when with 20 million, million people being killed, I mean,
yeah,
um, but somehow that woman or that man or that person who was whipped to near death, that
mhm,
person's tenacity to fight and keep living
yeah,
has
yeah,
us, whom they could never have predicted. And
yeah,
and we have taken on the responsibility
yeah,
of what we could call their redemption, because they had no way of knowing us. And
no,
they died being told they didn't matter.
yeah,
But their actions made us matter. You
exactly,
know, it's just like those the you know those women who organize Black Lives Matter, because I see them as part of that legacy. You know,
yes, yeah,
Colors, Garza,
yes,
um, they didn't know that what will come. And what they're not talking about as much are all the death threats and things that are leached on them. You know, we're talking about people who said they could only act if they say there are things that matter, that are greater than myself.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I, excuse me, I am one of those people who look back at them and say thank you. But I also learn from them that our generation, as Fanon said, face our mission to fulfill or to betray. And I hope we don't betray it.
Exactly. Yeah. Wonderful.
I know that people would love to hear y'all both speak all day, but we are actually already over time. So I want to honor your day and your generosity for being with us today, and honor everyone who has been watching at home. Thank you for your engagement. Thank you both so much for this beautiful conversation. I want to encourage folks who might like this, who weren't able to be with us. You can share this link and they can rewatch it immediately. We'll also be putting this up on our YouTube channel in about a day, and that'll be up with captions, so you can share that link as well. Our YouTube channel is just /Charis Circle. We would love for you to buy Fear of Black Consciousness from Charis. You can do that via this little teal button right in the bottom center of your screen. You can also buy Dr. Spiller's book from Charis. It is available, and we would love for you to purchase it from us. You can also encourage your local public or school library to buy either of these books. We do want them to be as accessible as possible to as many people as possible. Dr. Gordon's book is now available as a audiobook as well. So if you prefer audio, that is available through Libro.fm, which is our independent audiobook service. And we think that is a wonderful way to spread the word. So thank you both so much for your time, for this beautiful conversation. I wish you both health and safety going forward, and it has been a real treat to have you here.
Thank you, E.R. And thank you, Hortense. And thank you also the wonderful community that put together the books, and not only at Macmillan, Farrow Straus Giro, but also at Penguin Random House. And some people might be curious about the artwork behind me, but I'm proud to show that's a Sula Gordon. Sula Gordon, my daughter is an artist, and she produces wonderful paintings. And so she also did, so thank you. And to all of you in the audience, yes, as E.R. said, keep safe, healthy. I wish you all love, and despite the difficult times, joy.
Thank you. That's lovely. It's wonderful to see you.
Great to see you, Hortense. And thank you, E.R.
Thank you. Take care.